We've got a whole new captive audience of suckers that haven't been burnt yet. Let's make sure they never want to come back.
Yeah, and Andre goes on his next hiatus. God damn it, Andre. Why do you have to say it like that, man?
This like meme coin, 8D gen culture, you think we're moving further and further away from some of the true technologists?
Facilitating that swap to happen without slippage. That's a big one.
That's the Andre that we know right there, bro. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to The Roll-Up. Today, we have an episode with Andre Cronje, one of the original OG kind of DeFi pioneers, I could say. I mean, I myself was a Yearn finance farmer on like day one. Unfortunately, I didn't have much capital back then, but still one of the best farms in DeFi. And so, yeah, a lot to talk about the kind of transition of DeFi and into kind of where we are today. Andre, it's your first pod since I think you said 2022. So glad to be back on the scene. And thanks for coming out, man.
Yeah, happy to. Like, I'm not willing to do podcasts. It's just people normally always ask for it at the weirdest times and it just doesn't match. So you guys chose a great time. Congrats.
Nice.
It's really that simple.
Why is this a good time?
Because I happen to be like awake and working hours currently. So time zones always the best way to mess stuff up, and people always want like 2 a.m. or 11 p.m. or whatever. I'm not awake enough to do anything there.
Cool.
I think Sonic, the push to mainnet may have something to do with it as well, but I think we'll kind of get into that. Andre, what have you been up to, man? How's life?
Oh, broad questions to start with, hey? Life has been interesting. There has been a lot more legal, regulatory, and compliance stuff over the last 2 to 3 years. That have definitely been a very steep learning curve, as well as a lot harder than I think I anticipated. I mean, you guys would have seen it on Twitter and stuff already, right? Like almost every single team out there have received some kind of notice, either via ACC or DOJ or CTFC or other entities, VARA, UAE, Casbah, Caymans, etc. There's definite attention on this field, positive and negative. I think some of it is coming from the right place. Some of it is definitely some regulators and institutions we work with, and they just want to know how should they shape rules and or policy, etc., to facilitate. Others definitely just see it as complete fugazi, and they're just trying to block it any way they can. Don't necessarily think they're even wrong. I think there's definitely instances there. But anyway, so that's definitely been very time consuming. I deal with lawyers a lot more than I deal with coders over the last 3 years. But I'm happy to say that has been transitioning over the last year. And my coding time has increased more than my regulatory time, which is nice, which is very, very nice. Because ultimately that's where my passion lies. On the coding / development side of life, there's been a lot of stuff that, we've just kind of been working on. I hate to use the word, but, in stealth. Wasn't really meant to be in stealth. Just we happen to be working on it without advertising it. One thing that I'm definitely excited about is obviously Carmen, the new database coming out with Sonic. I think that's a big thing, not just for Sonic, but for all EVM-enabled chains, irrespective of L1, L2, whatever. It's a database customized for VM, especially EVM, execution and opcode. So like even anyone that uses the standard EVM or even a slightly modified one will be able to get benefit from just plugging into this. They'd swap out their Pebble or Badger or whatever that. So anyway, that's a big thing, definitely. Sonic as a whole, obviously a big thing. Sort of parallel to that, I've been trying to get on-chain credit scores going for quite a long time now, since as early as 2021. It took a lot longer to find the right people for the team, and that's partly because the right people aren't crypto people; they're traditional credit scoring people, and traditional credit scoring people, I had to really hard sell to convince them, hey, leave your very comfortable, big TransUnion or XDS or whatever job and come work on this experimental stuff. That alone took almost a year and a half. And then when we finally got the right people, and now we have a phenomenal team, then there was an immense learning curve for them because they're used to credit bureau data. Now part of their job is needing to, ETL and transform on-chain data. But it's been nice seeing, these guys start out like a little bit hesitant and then a little bit frustrated with the data. And nowadays, they're the biggest preachers to everyone that crypto is the next thing, blockchain more specifically. And it's always nice seeing that sort of conversion happening in people that start off very antagonistic, myself included. That's how I got into the space as well, by thinking it was all bullshit. And that's why I started with my original, code reviews, was because I was like, well, this is a lie, this is a lie, this is a lie. But turns out, there's something when you start poking underneath that is really phenomenal. Anyway, yeah, bunch of cool new stuff coming out, a bunch of DApps that I've sort of shelved or have not been able to complete due to underlying technology constraints coming out. So I'm expecting the next few years to be quite busy. Zero knowledge technology has advanced so much that, stuff that just wasn't possible a year ago, 2 years, 3 years, however long term you want to do, is not yet possible, but starting to become very close to real. And that is a big thing in crypto, because, even right now, bridges, oracles, exchanges, you name it, whether we like to admit it or not, there is still a lot of trust assumptions. Like, so much of cryptography is still just private public key. And ZK really changes that. It removes that private key out of the equation. So it removes those trust assumptions, those centralized entities. And I think, like, not maybe commercial level grade ZK, but at least niche, like libraries and stuff, is going to completely revolutionize oracles, exchanges, bridges, even, off-chain execution, to a large part. Anyway, sorry, long ramble, but lots of exciting stuff, and
Yeah.
a lot of bad stuff in between.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. The legal stuff can be quite the headache, and I'm sure the stuff that we've dealt with is quite a bit less than what you guys have, right? So, props to you for just kind of sticking around. I think, like, one thing that stuck out was that there was a lot of building that you're talking about there, but there wasn't a lot of, like, degenning on chain. And I had a really good podcast with Kane from OG Synthetics, and I was building Infinix, right? And
he's the original degen.
I'm sure you have some funny stories there, but we were talking about how like, God damn it, man, like, back in 2020 and 21, we were pushing thousands of transactions per month on chain, and how now it's like the enthusiasts on chain are just, like, not doing that much. So I'm just curious, like, what's been your perception of the evolution of DeFi since kind of a lot of these big 0 to 1s that came, right? Like AMMs, even just Yearn was a massive breakthrough, right? And then, how that has kind of changed, and why DeFi enthusiasts aren't really, like, on chain as much as they used to, or like what's going on there?
Again, a lot of factors to that question. Let's start from the technology perspective. I always believe that technology is iterative, so it doesn't really run linear. It's like there's a massive jump and then there's a plateau, and then there's a massive jump and then there's a plateau, and that's been true for every disruptive technology that's ever been created. So to put that in context, DeFi couldn't exist with just Bitcoin. So first the Ethereum and the EVM had to come along, and then even if you just had the EVM in isolation, you still can't have DeFi. So the ICO boom kind of had to happen because that created on-chain assets for the first time, and you needed on-chain assets. So, and then even something like yield primitives like Yearn, etc., couldn't exist because you first needed some native yield. So you needed automated market makers, you needed money markets, Uniswap, Compound, Aave, etc. When those existed, now you can start, doing aggregators. You can start doing derivatives. So a lot of those concepts that came later, something like GMX comes to mind. All of these things were only possible because of the previous iteration. But those iterations are unlocked either via some kind of social event like ICOs or some kind of technological breakthrough like the EVM. It's not necessarily only technology, it's not necessarily only social, but there's a mix of it that kind of have to happen. And I think right now we're not seeing a lot of new stuff because we're waiting for that next technology leap. And I think, obviously, I'm biased with the stuff we're doing at Sonic. So anyone listening to this, I have clear bias. Don't take this as gospel. But, a lot of the things we're doing there in terms of removing gas as a barrier, removing just cryptography, private public key for accounts as a barrier, incentivizing projects, and then, of course, the just latent throughput of the chain, they make these things, this next wave possible. And I'm going to try and show that with some of the new DeFi DApps I'm launching as well. But again, to use an example, if you look at YouTube or Twitch or any of these streaming platforms today, it would be completely impossible for them to have existed in the 1990s internet. What it is today would have been even impossible in the early 2000s internet. It first had to evolve sort of dial-up, ISDN, ADSL, fiber, interconnected with CCOM cables, etc., to get it to the point where it is today, where it can handle the scale. And I mean, today, Google, Yahoo, whatever, YouTube, etc., those are some of the biggest businesses in the world, but it was impossible for them to exist without those technological leaps first. So that next leap, I think, is an important thing. Then from sort of the social aspect, a lot of the old school DeFi fun for me personally came not from so much the yield farming, but from playing with new stuff, new primitives, new things to interact with, new things to explore, and I think largely new things to learn. And today that's not really the case, like all of everything that's happening now is just maybe a different spin, but mostly copy and paste of stuff we've already seen. So I think there's definitely sort of DeFi fatigue, and you can see that with people being more excited about Memecoins or whatever. I mean,
yeah, man.
2017, 2010. If someone launched a meme coin, like the community would have completely vilified them, like it would have been everything against all of us stood for back then as pure technologists. But at the same time, we need to accept that this industry has changed drastically. There are a lot more non-technical participants than there used to be. And a lot more greed. Not necessarily saying that's a bad thing. Each to his own, I'm sure. I do not believe the people that get excited about meme coins are the same demographic as people that get excited about DeFi apps. So I don't particularly think there's sort of an argument I had sort of early 2021 with all of these pointless farms was that they're stealing capital and investment from projects that are actually trying to build real stuff. And I think it might have been a little bit more true back then, but nowadays I don't think that's true anymore, because these same people that, throw their life savings into the next, I don't know, something with a hat, they don't particularly care about DeFi apps, and they would not have invested in that in any case. They would have looked at it, thought, that's complex, I'm not going to touch that. But funny picture, I understand. Which I guess is also a bit of a natural evolution from NFTs, really. Which, if I look at it from that perspective, it's really NFT without the technology. It's taking away another step that people actually had to go through. So yeah, I think market fatigue, I think technology leap, and I think an entirely new demographic that we need to kind of start accepting are, in the I'm hesitant to say community, but in the sector as a whole.
The Memecoin apes.
However they wish to refer to themselves, I will defer to them.
Do you own any meme coins, Andre?
I do not.
Do you think?
Nor do I have any plans.
Do you think?
But I also don't have any NFTs. So.
Fair enough.
Do you think this progression into more of this like meme coin ape degen culture, and is that taking us away from, like you said, back in 2010, 2017, they would have gotten vilified? Do you think we're appeasing that social demographic and we're moving further and further away from some of the true technologists? Are we losing them, or now is there both demographics here?
I think it's probably a bit of both. I think the silliness of the sector would definitely drive away some people that would have otherwise, probably contributed in some technological way. But I don't think that's a huge amount. I just think, one of I think the silliest sort of crypto memes is the we're so early, wait till retail gets here. Retail's been here for the last 3-4 years, and they're the ones YOLOing into all of this stuff. So I think, this is what happens when you reach a certain momentum. I mean, if we look at traditional stocks, it kind of went through the same iteration, right? Like, it was originally like a lot more proper finance / technologists that were excited about the potential technology of building the stock exchanges, settlement engines, clearinghouses, etc. But as it becomes more and more accessible, you start getting more and more meme stocks and these kinds of things. I was watching a fascinating documentary. When I credit the guy now, YouTube something, Yanni something, about Bed Bath & Beyond, and like him interviewing these investors. I mean, the company is bankrupt. The stocks have been wiped out. And these guys are still convinced it's part of some kind of plan that they're going to be reissued shares, and there's some behind the scenes acquisition with GameStop. And it's watching that, it's both sad and very eye-opening, because like a lot of those people are in crypto as well. And it makes me understand that, back again, going back to early DeFi, like my disclaimers in my Medium articles and stuff were enough for the people interacting with it, because they used to do research before touching stuff. Towards the end of that cycle, 2021, 2022, probably, people weren't reading anything anymore. They were just looking for a contract and throwing money at it. And I realized that no amount of disclaimers or Medium articles or anything was really going to prevent that anymore. And that's also why I took a definitively little bit step back. And fast forward to now, I think people don't want to, they want to gamble. Anyway, sorry, I think I'm veering off of the original thing, but I think it really just comes down to there are a lot more participants, which is both good and bad. There's a lot more attention, which is both good and bad. I do feel like there has been a lack of new entrants and new ideas into this market. But like I've said in the original question, I think that is largely due to needing a next technological wave or social or regulatory or whatever it is. Maybe that's hopium. Maybe we've chased away all of the technologists, but we'll see. That's for the future to decide, right?
Yeah, I think we'll get into some of the Sonic stuff, right? And just the thesis behind of extremely high throughput base layer, right? Because ultimately, a lot of the stuff that we were doing on Ethereum back in 2020 and 21 became pretty quickly limited by the Ethereum L1 scaling capacity, which has kind of led now to Solana's growth. You know, and that's kind of that's grown an entire narrative in and of itself. But one thing that I wanted to hit on with particular to one of your core DeFi innovations was this idea of like VE tokens and this vote locked, you know, this kind of bribing mechanism. And one of the most prominent and successful DeFi apps today is Aerodrome on Base. They're like one of the only DeFi apps that's got a very bullish token. They've got the flywheel spinning. Things are going. Like, what is your take on the VE token model today, the bribing Aerodrome? Like, is this model, like, now that we're, you know, several years past, so these vesting schedules have ran their course in some capacities. Like, what's your overall thesis or kind of view on the VE model now?
Yeah, well, just one correction there. The VE model was designed by Mitch from Curve. They were the first ones to introduce it. Credit where credit is due. That man is an absolute genius.
VECRV. That was a crazy day.
Yeah, my add-ons were just, you know, the change of flywheels where the LPs don't get fees, they get the bribes instead, and their fees go to the bribers who are the VE holders. So it was just to add a little bit of an extra layer there, and like, obviously I was quite active within the Curve ecosystem while not being, you know, a part of that team, etc. But like work closely with Mitch and guys, and you know, a lot of the stuff kind of naturally evolved over time. You know, the bribing mechanism that was, you know, originally built by Ben and kind of just launched by me. But that already showed that, hey, there is an interest in people incentivizing these emissions. Now, you could also argue that that's just an extra step, right? Because, I mean, you can just, instead of bribing these guys to vote for emissions on the pool, you could just put your bribe directly onto that pool and then have them vote for it. I think that's hard for a lot of, you know, starting teams, because people might not have belief in their token. So people don't really want to accept that. They'd rather take the emission. And then at the same time, for the VE holder, you know, their stuff's already locked. So there's no real, and they're not getting those emission rewards to their VE. So to them, it makes more sense to take on that bribe risk. So that way it kind of worked, I think, in terms of like the social layer and social perception. I still think it's a great model. I do think that we have seen that 4-year locks are probably a little bit too optimistic. I think that should definitely be something a little bit more liquid. And again, something I tried to address with the VE NFTs that later came, so you can at least sell the position even if you can't get the underlying. But we haven't really seen any real marketplaces for that kind of stuff. But that's also because the NFT scene as a whole has definitely quieted down a bit. In terms of, does the model work? And people reference Aerodrome.
Yeah, and Andre, real quick, I think the big pushback is that, like, after time, people they vest longer, then they have to keep revesting their rewards because they have to keep up with inflation. And so it's like, where's the exit, right? And you kind of addressed it with the ability to kind of sell as an NFT. But well, I think that's the pushback.
So two comments, I think. One is, does the VE model, VE33, not necessarily original Mitch's VE, I'm talking now about my VE bastardization that came with Solidly and eventually turned into all of these other guys. There are a lot of Solidly forks, a lot, probably 30 to 50, of which 3 or 4 are actually successful. Now that to me says it's not the code, it's not the tech, it's not necessarily the flywheel even. That to me tells that there's other external factors. You know, if you take raw Uniswap and you deploy it on any chain, and there isn't other competition, raw Uniswap will be the best. I don't think the same is true for using solidly on any chain. So I don't think it is the model that is making it successful. And I do think the model has some flaws as well that can be addressed. But now, quickly want to go to a different example, and then I'm going to come back to that. The idea of the flywheel, right, is that eventually, actually, let's forget about the AMM quick. Let's just go to Bitcoin, BTC. Let's keep it simple. Eventually, emissions stop. Eventually, it hits, theoretically. Let's say theoretically instead of eventually, because I have my own opinions on whether it's going to happen or not. But theoretically, at 21 million, there's no more issuance. So there's no more subsidized block rewards. The theory at that point is that there's enough on-chain activity that the fees generated in each block are enough to pay for the security of the network, for miners, validators, whatever you want to call it. This same statement is true for any blockchain out there. We're all basically subsidizing. You know, it's a little bit fake it till you make it. We're subsidizing activity until there's enough activity for the chain to survive. Should it reach the point where those incentives are no longer enough, or where the incentives stop and the fees are not enough, the blockchain should in theory suffer economic death. You know, there's just no one's willing to provide security to it. It just kind of dies out. Same is true for a bribe-based flywheel, right? The bribes are there to originally incentivize trading activity until the fees generated are enough that they themselves can sustain. Now in that already, you're seeing a flaw. Because if we look at again, let's go back to BTC, they only care about one thing and one thing only, security. So they are paying purely for security. Now, we are saying that the thing we are trying to pay for is fees. Now, fees are generated by trading activity. Does anything in the flywheel promote trading activity? And no, it doesn't. So right off the bat, it's incentivizing the wrong behavior. So I think there is definitely, you know, the first kind of thing you want to address. And then you also need to tweak that so that it's more aligned necessarily to capital efficiency than just wash trading. And at the same time, you know, there still has to be a little bit of an economic cost. So the max you can really go to is like a 90% sort of fee to bribe ratio, because otherwise people can just wash trade and you know, claim all of those fees. But anyway, so sorry, again, very long-winded, but I think the main thing is the conceptual model is right, but it's still not incentivizing the right thing yet, you know. And when I went from VE to VE33, I was already trying to change it so that the LPs don't get all of the benefit, because they're the LPs, you know, they collect all of the fees. I think some pools have a fee share of 50%, but that already, I think, was an important change. So that should go to the people who are managing the protocol, you know, because those VE lockers, they're the ones who are really coming to work on a day-to-day basis and saying, okay, no, this pool is more important, that pool is more important. This is what we want in our system. This is what the assets we want to promote. They're doing the work, so they should get the pay. The LPs aren't really putting in work, you know. They're putting in their assets, and they still should be rewarded, and you know, that's where your bribe loop comes in, because they still need emissions, etc. But I think it's still not right yet. But again, going back to Aerodrome, that has nothing to do with their success. You know, I've said this on Twitter a few times, because I do sometimes get annoyed when they try and distance themselves from the fact that they are using my code. And I think that is a little bit douchey, but at the same time, I keep telling them, guys, why are you distancing yourself? Because your success is not because of this code. It's not. It's nothing to do with it. So anyway, all kudos and respect to them, but the VE NFT isn't there yet. A few more changes, a few more iterations, and I think it can get there. But the goal of any decentralized solution needs to be self-sufficiency. And there's very few, other than like original Uniswap v2, there aren't many primitives that really capture that level of pure decentralization.
Do you think that's maybe because they can get forked and any self-sustaining model doesn't really have a moat?
Well, now, again, I think it's because the participants changed, right? I mean, even if we look, Uniswap, I think, is a fantastic example, because if we look back at Uni v1 and v2, they weren't a business. They were a bunch of hobby technologists that were playing around with some awesome ideas and built what I think is still, till today, some of the purest primitives ever created in our space. Fast forward a bit, a lot of funding, a lot of incorporated entities, all of a sudden it's starting to become clear, okay, hey, look, these guys are now a business. Now as a business, you almost have to add that centralized hook, because a true decentralized system cannot have an owner, it cannot have an operator, it cannot have a value extractor. And I think a great example of that is, again, when I launched Solidly, because, I launched it as a purely decentralized primitive. I could not interact with it. I could not update anything. I could not change it. I wanted to have something as pure as Uni v2 was. But already back then, you could see that the audience no longer cared about that. That's not what they understood. They want a team that is going to continue building and maintaining, and they don't want decentralized primitives. They want, nowadays, people building successful crypto businesses. Nothing wrong with that. Again, I myself am. Well, I don't know about the successful part, but I am building crypto businesses. We'll find out about the successful later. So I think, the space has changed, the people has changed, the requirements have changed, and it's sometimes hard to apply our old mental models to the current or even future ones that there are going to be, but we have to constantly be updating what we think of the space and how we look at the space. Another example, from my personal experience is I received immense backlash when I started, talking about and exploring regulatory crypto. The most prevalent one, is that, okay, but I've now made my success and then I closed the door behind me, which is wrong for a bunch of reasons that we can go into, but I also don't want to waste the focus of this podcast. But that already was, acknowledging the fact that we're moving away from true decentralization and we're moving to businesses. Nowadays, if you're going to be maintaining that entity and you are an active participant, slapping a DAO on it and calling it a day is not enough. You need a registered entity. You need to have, your checks and balances in order. You need to have a incorporated something somewhere. Because the flip side to that is, if you don't put your flag in the ground and say, hey, I am ABC from XYZ, and a lot of your users, for example, are from China, then China's going to say, okay, but you're not incorporated, so you're now part of China. So give. So the regulatory side is it's not a, hey, screw all you degens that just want to ape. They're still going to degen and ape because no one can do anything to them. But these teams are 100% a target. And they need to look at those things to protect themselves. Again, I go on such tangents. I apologize. It's been a while.
No, man.
A lot of stuff.
I mean, I'm thoroughly enjoying. I think part of the podcast that we wanted to get into was one of your recent tweets that kind of stirred up this modular community that pays attention to a lot of our content, as well as the ETH rollup community, which was basically your tweet said that the idea of launching your own app chain for an L2 is ridiculous because it's extremely expensive. And I'm kind of generalizing this, but before we get into exactly kind of that, I just want to preface the community so they understand your perception with building kind of Sonic and kind of why you may feel this way outside of just like the logical reasoning. So basically, people have been asking kind of what is Sonic. So Sonic is a EVM compatible L1, super high performance. You guys are advertising over 10K TPS, sub-second finality, basically trying to provide developers with exceptional scalability, good security, and basically this fee monetization program where you return 90% of basically the block space demand from these apps on Sonic back to the DApps themselves in this broader community initiative, which I think is ongoing right now in the biggest way ever of like make apps great again and like let's not give all the MEV to the validators. And in your blog post, you wrote that you love validators. I sense some sarcasm in that one, but maybe you do. So like, is that an accurate understanding of what Sonic is and kind of like how you guys are thinking about it? And then like, what is the relationship between Sonic and Fantom? And just like, if you could just kind of clear that up a bit, that'd be fantastic. And then we can kind of dive into some of the more technical stuff as to kind of, that Appchain or not.
Yeah, I mean, I hope people know about Fantom at least. I mean, I think we're high enough in the rankings and been around long enough that people should at least, even if they haven't used it, know of it. I mean, next to Ethereum, we are the oldest. Sure. It is the oldest operational EVM. So I think that counts for something. And, one of the highest, excluding Ethereum, one of the highest uptimes of any chain out there. Sonic originally started as an internal project name, really, for our next iteration. So we ended up getting a bunch of insanely talented professors and PhD guys from all over the world who all had very, very specialized fields. These guys weren't like, we build blockchains. They were like, oh, this one guy, he builds these specific opcodes for this VM. And, oh, this guy builds the specific like B-tree indexes for databases, ridiculously specialized stuff. But all of these guys came with such a wealth of information in their respective field that when we started engaging with them, we started hiring a lot of them. They presented a lot of amazing solutions and fixes for what blockchains could still accomplish. And to digress a little bit, this is something that I've seen in crypto so much, and it's largely part to a lot of the sort of, I think, cypherpunk philosophy of screw institutional knowledge and blah blah blah. But we spent so much time reinventing wheels and not learning from industries that have already been through this stuff for decades. So there's a wealth of traditional information out there in the technology sector that's just not applied to crypto. Anyway, so what we wanted to accomplish is bring these guys in. So I'm trying to recall that. I remember back then, I was pushing for VM parallelization and for us to find ways to create optimistic ways to execute transactions as quickly as possible, and by having the transactions themselves identify the memory space that they want to access, so that we can sort of pre-sort based on who's accessing what memory, and then we can do parallel execution. And we were gung-ho on that, and we were busy developing that stuff. And then I remember when Schultz came in, Professor Bernard Schultz from University of Sydney, he's now with us full-time, thankfully. Man's a genius. He came in, and he was like, okay, well, him and his team are going to spend a few months and they're going to run they're going to build a system that's capable of doing proper performance analytics, which at the time seemed a little bit but still, I was 100% wrong. It's absolutely phenomenal. Anyway, fast forward, they finally built this stuff, and now they're in a place where they can basically make really fast changes on the tech stack and then really quickly rerun entire blockchain execution, whether it's EVM, Fantom, whatever. And this allowed them to more accurately start seeing where are the real bottlenecks. And something like 90% of the bottlenecks was just with the database read and writes. Something I wasn't looking at, something we weren't even really exploring. So he proposed this new database that now ended up being Carmen. that was already a massive step. That's a almost 8x performance on throughput right there. And then they approached the VM, and they also started looking at parallelization, and it's still on the roadmap, but it's a much smaller line item than a lot of the other stuff. The main thing that they started focusing on the VM is superset instructions, which again, very standard in traditional VMs, where, hey, if I see this particular set of instructions repeating a lot, I combine that into a single instruction, which makes execution faster, it makes CPU usage, etc. faster. I mean, for example, every single ERC20 transfer, right? They go through a few opcodes. They go through a S read, and then they go through a write, and then they normally go through another read, and then there's a check or something. Condense that into one line item, and all of a sudden, that's 3 times the overhead on DB access, on write access, and all of those things that you remove. Again, huge performance increase there. And the two biggest things going into, so all of these little sub projects, Tosca was the VM, Carmen was the DB, all of these sort of started falling under the banner of Sonic, which was just, to show speed, the speed, Sonic, blah, blah, blah. And then because it ended up being such an internal name, when we launched the first testnet, it was also called Sonic. And we just got such positive feedback from that we ended up saying, hey, let's stick with the brand. People seem to like it. At the same time, I think it's beneficial to show, hey, this isn't a small upgrade. This isn't a 1.01 to 1.02 release. This is a version 1 to version 2 release. It's very significant in terms of what this blockchain is capable of doing. And that's kind of where Sonic came from and where we're at now, and why we're really excited for this launch, and it's the future of that seems even brighter, right? Because all we've done so far is the database and the supersets, but there's still a ton of other bottlenecks we've identified, not to mention stuff we've found in the consensus engine itself, where we have a lot of room for optimization. And I have long felt that there is still a lot of room of optimization at the base layer. When again, using the internet analogy, the guys, when they started, when we had 56K modems, their solution wasn't to put more 56K modems on top of 56K modems. Their solution was, hey, we need to get a better bottom layer, a better baseline. And that led to ISDN. And, if you had an ISDN line or a 56K modem line and fiber came out, you had to fully upgrade to that thing. It wasn't just built on top. And that shows you that the base layer changes and will keep changing. And, there is still a lot of room to change. Now, at the same time, I have to give a nod to Ethereum here. I don't blame them for the approach they're taking, because, Ethereum itself has so much economic value. It must be terrifying for them to make any change there. And I know it's terrifying. Yeah. You can see it by how long they take to release and stuff. When you have that much economic value at risk, the best thing to do is to do nothing. I don't disagree with their stance. I don't disagree with their position. I understand why they're exploring what they're exploring. I do think it's a little bit premature, though, and I think that's again. I cannot express how much I love Ethereum community, their roadmap. I would not be here today if it's not for them, and I will continue supporting them. But I do kind of feel, that they're starting to turn into the Nokia or BlackBerry, and eventually you have to adapt or kind of fade away. I don't think they will, for the record, but to use a crude analogy, I think that might be where we're at there, unfortunately. Anyway, sorry, again, long-winded, but that's how we went from Fantom to Sonic. And that's why the Sonic launch is coming up now. That's on the tech stack, right? That's on the tech stack. And like I said in the original, very first question, I believe that the tech needs to be faster, gas fees need to be less for people to be able to build new apps. I think this sort of social layer of apps is definitely we're starting to see. And the same thing kind of happened again if we compare it to traditional internet, where the very first things built for traditional internet was finance and military, because it's the only two things that made sense given how much it costs to interact with. And then as it got cheaper and cheaper and faster, you know, we started seeing user created content, MySpace, whatever, Facebook. And eventually, as it got even faster, we started seeing streaming, YouTube, Twitch, etc., TikTok, and we're kind of in our current iteration of HD internet, if I can call it that. And the same needs to happen on blockchain, right? Like it needs to get to that point where your users aren't, because no user's ever going to pay $100 to upload an image or listen to a 20-second video, you know, but they might be willing to do it for a few cents. So, you know, it's the same evolution. So gas fees had to come down, and then value capture. Now, value capture, this has got nothing to do with technology, but this, I think, is the premise of most of these things. And again, I'm going to use Uniswap as an example. And I use them as an example because I think they are a bloody pillar. So I'm not trying to pick on them. I'm not trying to point them out. Again, absolutely wonderful. And you see how we have to like be PC in our talks nowadays, because we have to add comments like that, because otherwise there's a bunch of people that are like, oh, he hates Uniswap. Oh, blah, 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 blah. Yeah,
you are way more humble these days, Andre. You're far more humble.
You have to add qualifications, you know, because I speak out of respect, not out of people often see criticism as a dislike or a negative emotion or something like that, and it's not. It's a comment on what is happening versus what we're seeing and a different perspective. But they are now launching Unichain, and they're probably one of the few ones that can do it, if I'm being honest. I think a lot of teams are going to follow their example though and fail. And why would Uniswap do that? I mean, Uniswap has generated almost $3 billion in fees for validators. Not for LPs, not for Uniswap Foundation, not for the team, not for their VCs, not for the fake Uniswap DAO, which I feel sorry for those guys. But $3 billion in fees just to validators. That's ridiculous. That's absolutely ridiculous. So it makes 100% sense that they're like, that's the value we want to capture. And I think secondary to that, you know, Coinbase really showed us how much money you can print by just like launching a centralized L2 and capturing all of those fees for yourselves. Because I mean, what they pay to Optimism and Ethereum is negligible in the fees that they are able to capture. Now, obviously, my own comments there on centralization, blah, 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 it not being a real blockchain, but whatever, they're businesses, they're running it as businesses. And I think, again, that's why I love Uniswap as the example, because you can see their own evolution in their crypto journey. You know, when they started, it was Hayden and Moody and a few guys, you know, just in a dorm room, like having fun building tech. And now it's evolved into a multi-billion-dollar business. So it makes sense that they are running it as a business now, because it is no longer Uni V1, Uni V2, which was just these awesome experimental primitives. They should be doing value capture because they are an incredibly successful business. I don't even remember what the original question was.
It was
go Uniswap.
It's about value. Well, okay, so you were getting into like the crux of the
value extraction.
Versus...
Yes. So it makes sense that apps are like, hey, I want some of that. That's where the real money is at. Now, for me to use a very dumb example, we at Sonic approached it from the perspective of, okay, what are the successful companies that we think we are closest to? And those would be YouTube, Twitch, and the Google Play Store and the Apple App Store. And all of these guys have a similar model. You know, they are, hey, you people out there, you're the content provider. We're the platform. You come to us, you provide your content. We're going to link you to the eyes that are going to be looking and interacting with you. And you're going to get part of that revenue, rev share, whatever you want to call it, you know, content creator program, payments in the App Store, whatever it is. So in this example, you know, if let's say the next Uniswap comes out, team, not the original project. I need to change the name. 2Swap comes out. And they're like, we're going to launch an app. And their option is, hey, we can launch on Ethereum and have no value capture. We can launch our own Appchain and have value capture, or we can launch on a blockchain that shares that value capture with us. I think each one is a different example for a different requirement. If you want maximum security, you're going to go to Ethereum because that's what you're paying for, right? If you want maximum capture and you are willing to run all of those overheads, run your own app. But to take that back to the YouTube or Twitch example, you know, that's like, hey, my content is successful on YouTube, so I'm going to launch my own website so I don't have to share fees with YouTube anymore. And we've
that's
seen
in the current
some content creators
paradigm.
try that.
I think that's in the current paradigm, Andre, right? Where like the interoperability and like there's these concepts around how bridging isn't that easy, and you know we still have to switch chains and things, right? So it feels like that. But like in a future world of interoperability between blockchains, either by coordinated block building or ZK proof aggregation, you stack that on top of some sort of like chain abstracted wallet experience, which of course Sonic would be included in this kind of broader crypto chain experience. Doesn't really matter if you're an app on YouTube. It's like my channel on YouTube is, and you've got Andre's channel and Rob's channel, and whether we're on the same base layer or we're all just our own chain, at the end of the day, the user experience shouldn't be drastically different. And then I think the customizability that you get from being an app chain is a strong argument towards the app chain. I think all the economic arguments, I think some of yours are a little bit rooted in like 2020 and 2021. I'm not sure how aware you are of kind of like the developments of the commoditization of the infra stacks, but I do think that like in that future world, that app chain thesis becomes composed of like how custom do you want to build your execution environment? And if you don't really need that, then like something like Sonic makes a ton of sense, right? But I think like broadly, the YouTube example is good for the here and now. But I also think that in a future world, that the YouTube example will look like my channel is my chain, but it's still connected to the entire YouTube network. And so that is kind of like what I would push back on that example.
Okay, so there's a lot of what ifs in that world, right? Like chain abstraction is not there, wallet abstraction is not there, interoperability is not there, and interoperability has been a hot topic of discussion since as early as 2017. Big guys back then, Aeon, Onchain, etc., not around anymore, or maybe they are. I just don't see them on my feed. So if you are out there, my apologies. Do more Twitter stuff so I can see you again. And we've had our own massive interoperability incident with multi-chain and the Chinese government seizing their servers and stuff, you know. So for now, I will say I do not believe that abstracted future is anytime soon. I'm actually willing to go as far as to say I don't think we're ever going to see that abstracted future. But let's park a pin in that. Let's ignore that quickly. Actually, first thing first, a disclaimer, right? I think this is important. I think one thing that I loved seeing on those posts that I did, two biggest pushbacks were always, yeah, but a lot of the stuff has already been commoditized to the point where it costs zero, which I then went and I looked at all of these things that they say is commoditized to where it's zero. It's not. It might be. It's not right now. The other one is definitely that I'm living in 2020, 2021, which is interesting because maybe I've definitely not been as active on Twitter. That's possible. There definitely could be tech out there that I haven't seen. But the main disclaimer that I wanted to get to is that the biggest believers in rollup as a service and that these things are commoditized to the point where it won't cause any friction are people selling rollups as a service.
Or data
At the same time, I'm saying, hey, don't do that. Go to a layer one that shares the fees with you. And that's because I'm selling a layer one that shares the fees with you. So you have to take into consideration where this information is coming from, right? Show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome. But I think it is important to take the Yearn now into consideration, right? Like sure, with enough foresight, you could have said, oh, why bother building MySpace? It's not going to exist in 5 years from now. But it's the only thing that could exist in the Yearn now for the next iteration of stuff to happen. Now, a lot of these things that they say are commoditized. Oracles, native issuance, bridging.
Block explorers.
They aren't. You know, like the one response on one of Nick White's tweets was because he was commenting on mine where he was saying that, hey, look, you know, you get block explorers, block scout, you get oracles, skew, and a few others that he mentioned. You get, you know, bridged assets, which are as good as native assets. And the comment was, there are stable coins, then there are stable coins. There are explorers, then there are explorers. There are bridges, then there are bridges. And I think that is true. But now that being said, that doesn't mean no app chains will be successful, but it also means a lot won't be. You know, there are exceptions. But I think people are underestimating the real cost of overheads of running these things. A big example right now is I think it's Initia, which I played with a bit, which is phenomenal. Like, I'm so shocked
they have a
with how
great
easy
UX.
it is to get, you know, sort of a testnet and everything up and running. At the same time, I can get a layer 1 up and running with a few clicks within half an hour. That is not a layer 1. You know, when I actually want to productionize that thing, there are a lot more costs. There are a lot more overheads. There are a lot more integrations. There are a lot more BD. There's the sort of fun experimental side, which is normally designed to be very easy. And then there's the production level side, which is a lot harder. And you need teams and you need people that can support. And you need, you know, all of a sudden now you need to think about hosting infrastructure. You need to think about, am I running this on someone else's infrastructure? I'm going to be running it myself. How are people going to be participating? How customizable is these things? Am I doing vendor lock-in when it comes to an oracle or a bridge or something? And what if I need to change those later? What if these guys no longer support it? Which we've also seen happen a lot in the space. So there are a lot of lock-ins you do when you do that versus deploying a DApp on a layer 1. A lot easier to move around, a lot easier to migrate. There's already a lot more infrastructure available. So while I acknowledge Rollups as a service is definitely a lot further than I thought it was, but I think it is still very far away, and maybe we'll never get to the sort of end vision of complete abstraction. Because I have yet to see any real bridge breakthroughs that can get us there, with maybe the exception of ZK Tech, like I say, if it gets there, or maybe rather when it gets there, because I do think it eventually gets there. But there are a lot of problems to be solved in between now and then, you know. And one thing I do know our industry absolutely loves is building a technical solution and then looking for a problem that fits, instead of finding a problem and then building the solution. Yeah,
and I do think that there are arguments for the customizability of app chains, given the despite the overhead. But you mentioned like the real overhead cost and how that differs from the cost that is being paid to validators. And so, I mean, in my mind, part of the value in blockchains is that these systems are so dynamic that they converge to their real cost. Otherwise, someone else will come in and subvert it, and you'll pivot to the technology provider that provides that at a lower cost. And so, you know, I saw on your article, you know, $2.5 billion Uniswap is paid to validators. Is that because the Ethereum security costs that much, or why? I guess, like, why?
Safe is moving the world's GDP on-chain. With the introduction of SafeNet, Safe is taking this to the next step very soon. Check out net.safe.global to learn more about how Safe is moving the world's GDP on-chain.
Welcome aboard on our journey into the singularity. This is the endgame roadmap for Frax and Fraxtal, the new L2 out of the Frax ecosystem that is totally based on fractal scaling. Fraxtal is a modular L2 blockchain built by Frax with modular and fractal scaling in mind. Fractal scaling is based on the Mandelbrot set of fractal images, and it explains how L2s become L3s and the entire Appchain lifecycle goes through its evolution. The Frax ecosystem is made of some of the top builders in the space and has stemmed from its OG days of the Frax stablecoin. It is now in the LST space, the LRT space, and this Fraxtal L2 joins the existing suite of Frax products, including Frax Swap and Frax Lend. You can see Frax Ferry, the bridge to go from any chain, Arbitrum, Optimism, or mainnet into the Fraxtal mainnet. Bridge your tokens and bring your Frax assets into the Fraxtal ecosystem. Join today to get the best out of Fraxtal. You are still early. Join today. Take part in our expedition into the singularity.
Redstone modular oracles are available on 50 plus chains, trusted by over 100 clients and over 6 billion in total value secured. Visit redstone.finance to find out more.
Oracles, again, I think are a great example. You know, there are a lot of oracle providers out there. Some do an incredible job, probably better than some of the best guys, but they're not used because they don't have that aggressive BD that locks in the big teams. If you want Aave to deploy on your chain, you're going to have to open your wallet and pay Chainlink. It is that simplistic. There's no two ways about it. So, you know, there are oracles and then there are oracles. And I originally, when I launched Yearn, there's a Medium post I did at this point, probably 6-7 years ago, where I specifically said, I am launching Yearn and I am not adding any fee extraction because eventually someone will copy this code and the fees will converge to zero. So there's no point in having that fight. I'm just going to make it zero from the start. And I was very wrong. Turns out you can add a lot of fees on top of that. And people almost feel safer when there are fees because then they feel, oh, there's someone that's actually looking after this and they're maintaining it and they're making sure it's in the right places, etc. I loosely sort of follow US politics, to give a different example, in terms of their economic policy, not so much about anything in the country. But one thing that I didn't know, that I started looking into was because tariffs is currently a big topic, you know, putting a tariff on external goods being imported in the country. And it was chicken tariffs, if I remember correctly, that they were importing chicken tariffs. And they ended up putting a tariff on all external imports of like 20%. And this was back in like 1960 or something around there, a very long time ago. And it was meant to only be for like 5 years. That tariff still exists today, because what ended up happening is now all of the imported chickens all of a sudden cost a lot more. So what you expect is now consumers are buying the local stuff. But instead, the local guys saw, that costs a lot more. Let's up our prices. And now, when people try and kill these tariffs, these guys with all of this extra profit are lobbying to say, no, don't do that. Let's keep these tariffs. We like these tariffs. These are good tariffs. And everyone got screwed except the local producers who could just take that extra 20% as a pure profit margin. So there's the theory, which is the same in, you know, capital efficient markets, which say that it converges to, you know, the real cost. It's just not true. That's not how humanity and greed works. And it's the same for these blockchain solutions now. So again, you've got the social element, which is, okay, this oracle does the same job, but it doesn't have that stamp of approval that a lot of these teams want. The same thing with a lot of the so-called native USDC. And all respect, again, to teams like Layer Zero, Wormhole, well, I guess not Wormhole anymore, hey? But all of these guys, like it has worked great, And so far, there has not been issues. But a user that's holding, let's say, $5 million in USDC is still going to want it in native issued instead of the bridge one. Just again, from that social mental perspective, even though technologically it's the same thing. So in practice, yes, it should converge to zero. But we've seen for a very long time, Block Scout, I think, is a great example. Fantastic explorer. I used to use them on all of my experimental, and even when we launched Fantom for the first time, Block Scout was what we used. They were phenomenal. They are still phenomenal, but they're just not as good as Etherscan, and they're just doesn't have that same name recognition. So the big chains are willing to pay Etherscan so that they can deploy that. They're willing to pay Chainlink so they can get the Oracle. They're willing to play Circle so that they can get the USDC issuance. Because that little bit of brand and that bit of recognition is worth more than just having the stablecoin or the Oracle or the bridge or the Explorer. And I think that's being missed by a lot of these guys. And that's because none of them have yet gone from this is technologically possible, which it is. Right now, it is technologically possible to launch a rollup at near zero costs that has a block explorer, that has stable coins, that has an Oracle, that has a bridge. This is a fact. I've seen it myself. But it's not a production scale, Circle issued, Chainlink supported, etc., etc.
I mean, and that was your argument in the post, right? Like if you're trying to build for top 10 chain, right, then there's a different level of scale that you're going for. And I'm actually I'm literally here with a friend who's building like his own L2 using a kind of like a customized execution environment, and they're going to raise their Series A for many millions because it costs them a lot of money. And I asked him today, I was like, what's your burn? He was like, it's around $400,000 a month. And I was like, holy shit.
It'll spike quick.
And I was like, yeah, and they're on they're pre-mainnet, right? And so I think that undeniably is true. But I think there's use cases where stablecoins or stablecoins, bridge
100%.
is great.
100%.
I think gaming is a good one that we've seen. Social stuff.
Oh yeah.
Stuff that's left
off the grid is a great example. I think.
Exactly.
I mean, we'll see how well it still does in the future. But that's a comment on the game, not a comment on the tech. What Avalanche did there by giving it its own chain with its own costs and everything. Great. 100%. Wonderful idea.
Is there a spectrum of applications or specific? Is it applications which don't need that much interoperability, perhaps are not that financially sensitive, but maybe require extensive customizability or a special UX maybe or something? Is there a class of applications other than just I'm Polymarket, I have a massive marketplace, I'm getting all my traffic from mass media to polymarket.com, they're not coming in from Binance, I can just launch my own chain or Unichain. Outside of these large ones, is there a spectrum that you think of what class of application is better suited for the Appchain model versus not or no?
So in the current iteration of this world, I would say Appchain works if you don't need interoperability or composability. But if you don't need interoperability or composability, launch an AWS server with a MongoDB database. You do not need the extra complexity of blockchain on top of that. Blockchain's beauty comes in when you add the interoperability and composability. So again, it feels like a technological solution trying to fit the problem instead of the other way around.
Yeah. So you like the Appchain thesis as a technologist because
awesome.
Because is it the sovereignty properties or what is the properties that appeal to you?
Truth be told, it's just awesome. I mean, the amount of effort it took to launch a blockchain when I did my first ones in 2017, 2018 versus now being able to go tick, launch, having a block explorer, oracles, it's just cool, man. I don't think it's practical. I won't use it or launch anything with it, but it's just amazing. I mean, the space has come so far that we've gotten to a point where we can offer that to someone. What I'm a little bit worried about is, new people coming into the space, seeing that and thinking when they click those tick boxes and say launch, then they're golden. Because like your battle has only started then, and you probably need to investigate a little bit more on your requirements. For now, I think L2s have just moved the value extraction. It used to be layer 1 validators, and now it's whoever is running the sequencer. So in the Uniswap example, they're going to be running the sequencer. Great. In the Coinbase example, they're running the sequencer. I saw recently Optimism paid like $50-something million in tokens to Kraken to launch their L2. Who do you think is going to be running that sequencer? Any guesses? I'm guessing Kraken.
Kraken, and then by downstream effect, Optimism gets the like the revenue sharing.
That's tiny, man. Like you look at the numbers that Base is paying to Optimism. It's not even pennies on the dollar. It's whatever smaller than pennies on the
It's
dollar.
To join the super chain, there's a fee requirement that you pay back to Optimism Collective.
Yeah.
It ends up being
to how much you can extract. It's tiny, man. It should be a lot more.
Right.
It should be a lot more. It's like it's a database license. That's what it is. It's hey, I want to have my app using Oracle, so I pay Oracle a license. I'm still extracting a lot more value from the consumer than Oracle is getting for the license.
So this is where Sonic's idea comes from, then, because I'm with
not
you,
a bad
man.
business model, but
maybe another way to look at
decentralized sequencers shouldn't be getting all of the revenue.
Well,
I mean,
let's first
drop the apps.
Let's first drop that decentralized word, because decentralized.
No, I said centralized. The
Okay,
centralized
okay.
sequencers should not be getting all of the revenue. They should be going back to the apps.
Yeah, which again is at least a step in the right direction with Uniswap, where they're like that value capture is going to token holders. Again, it's a bit of a solution trying to fix a problem, because their problem was really we kind of in a response launched Uni when we maybe shouldn't have yet, and like now we kind of have to help those guys. Still, they're trying to fix it. Kudos. Definitely, centralized sequencers I think is pointless. I think run a database. Why does it need to be a blockchain? It doesn't. I don't think Sonic solves sort of the umbrella problem of why rollups, why app chains, etc. I don't think so. I'm not egotistical enough to say it does. I think it addresses a very niche problem, which is we see an incredible amount of value extraction from MEV guys or validators that should be going to DApps. It's the same early YouTube, Twitch, using that example again. There wasn't revenue share, but it was those early content creators that made the platform what it was. And the reason why it continued growing is because they were smart enough to be like, hey, it's actually the content creators that's drawing the eyes, so let's pay them money. And in our world, it's the dApp devs. No one uses a blockchain because it's fast. You use it because there's an app you want to use. You use it because there's some economic activity you want to accomplish. So those are the guys that bring the users, and those are the guys that need to be appropriately incentivized. And that's the thing we're trying to address. We're like, so we ran the numbers. We were like, okay, at what point we acknowledge that the validators are being grossly overpaid. The amount of money they make versus their overheads in running cost. And we work closely with the teams running these things to see, hey, what's your profit margins? How much can we realistically drop this before you would no longer be running a validator? And that was a big bloody margin. I mean, our fee program is 90% of the transaction fee now goes to the dApp instead of the validator. And the validators are still profitable on that. So, I mean, that's a lot of extraction that's just happening as pure profit. But, that's the specific niche we're trying to address, where the guy is like, I don't want to launch an ETH because my app is going to be generating a ton of fees. So what options are there for that guy? Or girl, my bad. Where do they go? And I don't really think there is a lot of options for them right now, other than launch my own Appchain.
Yeah, they
or launch
launch
by an
Onchain.
L2.
Or
But
until
if they
these
do
L2s
that,
start, yeah,
or L2s find ways, to split those sequencer
distribute
fees
it,
to those
yes.
steps, which they can do, But again, then you're relying on a very centralized entity. Now, to be fair, you do the same thing by implicitly relying on the Sonic chain that it is going to distribute. So you can still see that as a centralized entity, but that's ultimately controlled by the code and the validators. That's not
Okay, so it's
that's not a
validator
Coinbase.
based.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not like governance based or anything. It's like a strict
No.
programmatic distribution of fees based on who generates the most, basically who spends, or which app spends the most gas or the most demand for block space, or how exactly does same thing?
So you deploy a smart contract. That smart contract, when you interact with it, it costs you, let's say, $1 in fees. Now, it might have interacted with subcontracts, so there's a little bit of calculus that has to happen there to see. But ultimately, it's who used what amount of gas, right? Because that's what we're looking at. $1 equals, let's say, 1 million gas. This contract used 200K of that. This contract used 300K of that. This contract used 500K of that. Okay, you get 90% of 500. You get 90% of 300. You get 90% of 200. Done. And that goes to the person who deployed the contract or the subsidiary they sent from there. So it's simple, it's the same as registering for any revenue-based program where I'm like, okay, I'm going to upload my videos. Here's my banking details, and the system needs to do the rest.
Yep, and it goes to the apps that brought that user activity, and not only does it bring you 90% of the activity that you brought the platform, but you also lower your overhead from all the costs that we were talking about earlier.
Because now all of a sudden, you still get all of the benefits of a layer one. You get the chain link, you get the native USDC, you get the native bridging, you get. I mean, another thing, right, is centralized integrations. Like a lot of, if we consider, let's say someone wants to build the next big payment app L2, at some point they need fiat and exchange on ramps, off ramps. Binance, OKX, Coinbase, whatever, they're never going to be like, oh, if you deploy with this L2 stack, you have native integration into us. That's just never going to happen. They have to add that integration layer. We're in a different crypto world now where it's not just a technological solution. There are real companies, real integrations, real people that need to put in time to connect your thing to theirs. Now, the argument there is obviously eventually we get to the point of composability where your layer 2 then sends to the bridge contract that is integrated into the Coinbase thing, and then it's automatically on there. Sure, I acknowledge that could exist in a future world from a pure technology perspective. When I review that from a business opportunity perspective, it starts falling a little bit flat. Because again, it doesn't make sense for Coinbase to automatically integrate that, because a big part of exchanges, using them as an example, a big part of their business model is things like listing fee, marketing fee, etc. So them controlling that gate to stop you from doing that integration, that's inherent to their business. Unlikely they're going to remove it.
Now, at what point does it make sense for an app chain to graduate, or excuse me, for an app that is deployed? I think it makes a ton of sense, right? For projects to deploy, they think that they're going to generate fees. They want to get the most fees as possible. But is the only, in your thesis for app chains, is the only reasonable deployment of an app chain going to be to graduate beyond and go from 90% to 100% of fee capture?
So I would like to refrain from commenting that now until I see what happens with Unichain. And the reason I say that is because you in theory you gain a lot, right? But the question is, how much of those fees are because of a shared user base or because of composability? I'd like to do the numbers and see how much of Uniswap's fees are because of on-chain liquidations happening. Now, if you're in your own ecosystem and there is no Aave, Compound, Silo, whatever, Morpho, all of the new stuff. See, I keep up to date. I'm not in 2020. How much of the activity is generated by them, or how much of the activity is because of arbitrage happening via aggregators? How much of that activity is because of there being multiple AMMs and that spread being covered between it? I'm very curious to see what their fees are going to look like when they're living in isolation.
But we might see Aave deploy on Unichain.
Now that's the exception I wanted to say is Aave, Uni has that level of power that they'll probably get native USDC. They'll probably get Chainlink. They'll probably get Aave, Compound, etc. to all come join their ecosystem. But will it ever be as big as everything happening on layer 1 Ethereum? We'll see. And that's why I'm saying I want to refrain from answering that until I see that, because they might now be capturing 100%, but they might actually only be getting 50% of what they could have been getting if they were on layer 1 and they had some kind of fee split.
We did a
the
podcast
Ethereum layer 1
Justin.
was never giving. It was never giving fee rebates like Sonic.
No. So for them it makes perfect sense. But I'm saying for me to answer the question, when should you go from 90% to 100%? I need that data.
Yeah, understood.
I think they'll be making less than they would have if Ethereum was giving them some kind of fee rebate.
Yeah, we did a podcast with Justin Drake, and this was the entire thesis around composability was just this, that it would make more to join shared sequencer environments, or in fact based sequencing, because you have the net positive effects of composability, and you might lose some from giving up your centralized sequencer revenue, but it would be offset and then some by the shared sequencer composability benefits.
No, I 100% agree. But in that case, just launch on a layer 1 that already has all of that stuff. Whether it's Solana, Avalanche, Sonic, not plugging ourselves, but there are a lot of options out there where you get that composability.
We saw that same kind of phenomenon with regards to the LVR scenario on SexDex arbitrage currently, where the question is like, should we basically conduct app-specific sequencing for a DEX, right, where they have their own transaction rules, and they have their own kind of like isolated, siloed app. But then the same conundrum comes, right, where it's like, is the loss of composability, which is where a lot of the uninformed flow is derived from, which is where the LPs on DEXs get a lot of their profits from, or at least their ROI from, is that loss of uninformed flow going to offset the potential loss in MEV or gain in MEV? And the reality that we kind of came to was, until the composability benefits of like builder commitment or shared sequencing kind of comes about, the loss of uninformed flow is really not going to it's not going to help anything. It's just going to pull both down in terms of the amount of revenues available to LPs. Just going to make LPs less profitable. It's not really going to make a big change. Ironically, it's the same kind of scenario here with where should you deploy, because, and we keep coming back to this, Andre, which is like, in a future of, 200 millisecond intent-based interop, ZK-proof aggregation, and chain abstraction, these questions change, but for the current reality, these trade-offs are very present. So
that I'm not discounting the potential future or the future that all of these roll-up teams are working towards, but I am acknowledging that there are, on a daily basis, new DApp builders and entrants into our markets. And I think right now they are confused as hell about what they should be doing, or where they should be going, or who they should even be talking to. And I think it's enough of a barrier that it actually kind of stops you. I mean, looking at Yearn, right? Like, why did I launch that on Ethereum instead of Fantom? I mean, Fantom was the blockchain I had built. It makes sense that I would support that, right? But Ethereum was the only place to deploy, because that's where the composability was, that's where all the apps was, that's where the yield was, that's where it made sense. And that's not the case nowadays anymore. Like when I was deploying that as a DApp builder, the answer was presented to me rather intuitively. Now I feel a builder coming into the space, it's enough of a choice that it'll shut you down.
Yep.
I don't think that's a good thing.
One of our most read pieces is a piece that we put out as to like, if I'm a builder today, where do I build? And it was basically like general purpose L2 or Solana / fast L1 or Appchain. And it's just like, honestly, the trade-offs of all of them, they all exist. It's like it wasn't just like plug into Ethereum. So Andre, you're like, to kind of wrap us up here, it's been a great conversation, but I really want to talk about some of these app ideas for Sonic going into mainnet. You're like, to me, you're like one of the OG kind of ideas for apps in the space. I mean, we had we had Yearn, then there was Keeper, then we had some others that just kind of came, and you just constantly had these iterations and ideas. And so a couple that I saw you recently tweet about that I would love to learn more about, and I think that the community is particularly interested in if you're going to launch any of these primitives that you've been kind of teasing about with the Sonic mainnet. The first one being protection markets. So basically this idea of generalized on-chain insurance for arbitrary claims using vaults with collateral deployed into yield. That seems pretty interesting. Then there's another one they put called LevX, which is on-chain leverage spot with arbitrary margin. We've seen this, I think, in some other ecosystems, but you might have some twists. And there's a couple others, in particular, one that you already mentioned, which was the Blockchain Bureau, on-chain credit scores. Basically, like, let's get some under collateralized lending going in DeFi. I mean, it was a dream kind of, back in 2020. So there's 3 or 4 app ideas there. I mean, if you just want to take a couple of minutes and just talk about these and maybe how they work or why you think that there's product market fit, that'd be super cool. And just kind of like talk, just run through them.
Yeah. So, I mean, first question, will they launch on Sonic? Yeah. I mean, I'm getting 90% of all the fees, and I'm confident they'll at least generate fees, whether they're successful or not, and I want to get paid. My persona there has definitely changed. If I'm going to be eating shit on Twitter, I might as well be getting paid. Yearn, Keeper, etc. was not worth it. I got all the shit and none of the dollar, so screw that. Change of mentality there for me. And
dude, but you became a
expensive.
legend. You became a legend.
Not sure if that's a good or a bad thing, but still. But again, going back to the I could only launch Yearn on Ethereum example. Some of the stuff I can only launch on, not necessarily only Sonic. I could probably go Solana or Avalanche as well, but you need something that's low on fees, high on throughput, and that's not Ethereum nowadays. Could argue it's one of the L2s, but for obvious reasons, I'll be sticking to Sonic. And I also think it's a nice chance to show people the new kind of stuff you can build with this new kind of speed. And this is new speed. This is speed we have not seen in blockchain yet. Protection markets that I've been toying with for a very long time. The concept, consider a standard money market. Let's take Aave. You deposit money, you deposit USDC, and someone borrows that USDC, right? Now in this case, instead of, I'm still depositing USDC, but I'm deciding I am depositing USDC into, let's say, USDC Uniswap, which means this bucket that I'm depositing, this is underwriting Uniswap risk. So if there's an exploit there, then I will be paying via my deposit for this. Okay, now on the counter side to that, you have someone that I have $1 million in Uniswap, so I would like $1 million of coverage. So I go borrow the USDC Uniswap, which is now deposited by that original depositor. Now as long as I'm holding that, I'm paying those interest rates, and that's more equivalent to sort of monthly fees. Versus a lot of the existing insurance models we've seen are very high upfront fees because they have no way to do any kind of recurring systems. So this changes that already to a recurring system. So there's very little upfront cost, other than like whatever amount of collateral you need to, cover the difference in LTV basically. But so now let's say an exploit does happen. Now I can redeem my borrowed USDC Uniswap for the underlying USDC. If an exploit doesn't happen, then, the USDC depositor just keeps getting those interest rates. And the nice thing about that is you can create any kind of arbitrary coverage without anyone needing to, an entity that stops it or controls it. So if I launch my new AMM, I can go to protection markets. I can deposit 100K of USDC for USDC, my new AMM. I create that market. And then anyone that wants to go deposit money in there, they can just borrow from that market, and then they've got coverage. The only time when there is interaction, and this is why it does need some layer of governance, and this is potentially why it needs a token, but I'm trying to not do tokens on any of the stuff because I don't think the current user base really understands tokens anymore. So I'm trying to get as far as I can without. But in this example, you do need some kind of governance that decides when the claim becomes valid. So, they don't create markets, they don't do any of that stuff, but you do need an arbitrator to be like an exploit did occur. Sometimes it's easier. So one of the first things I'm launching with actually is a codified protection market for impermanent loss. So I've got the Onchain formula that I've already created that measures the volatility and that can show realized impermanent loss based on when did you deposit and where it is now. So in this case, you'll have USDC IL Uniswap because you deposited into the Uniswap pair. And it's pair agnostic. You just point to the LP where you deposited. Now, in this case, it's nice because whenever I make that claim on chain, the system can go and check, hey, what was the IL? Okay, cool. This is the coverage that the guy needs to be able to claim. So then you don't need that third party. But in some cases, third parties are required for off-chain stuff. Because one example could be, if there's you could assume that a money market gets exploited when a lot of its funds disappear, right? But at the same time, someone could do a flash loan to withdraw all of the funds, then say, hey, there was an exploit. Then the system triggers on chain. There is an exploit because all of the funds disappeared and then it pays out. So that's a case where you don't want something like that.
You don't necessarily need a token, right? You could use an oracle of you could treat your own token as the governance system and use the oracle that way. Treat that as the oracle. Or you could just plug in your own that would tell whether a dispute had happened.
Yeah, correct. So you can either do it centralized, or I can obviously use fees from the system to hire a team to do it, or you can, get volunteers, which I think is dangerous. It all depends on your spectrum of decentralization, right? Like at its base, I can do it. Now, one more removed is, okay, cool. I'm not doing it altruistically. I need to get paid for my time. So we add fees, right? So now instead of the LP getting 100% of the interest rate, I'll take 10% cut. Okay, but now all of a sudden, okay, now we have fees. Let me hire a team. Okay, so that's sort of the next stage because now it removes my centralized, component. But now at the next stage, you're like, okay, but let's make it user participants, which has its own red flags because now as a user, I can deposit a lot of money. Now I have a big say in the vote. And now all of a sudden I decide there was an exploit and other people can't override me. So now at the most decentralized stage, that means that these guys need a something at stake problem. And now all of a sudden you come to a standard, Sybil sort of POS model and you have a token. So tokens to me are the absolute of decentralization. People nowadays don't understand that. They see a token as somewhere lower down here on the spectrum where it's like part of the team, and it's just not the case. So I mean, we'll see where it ends up on that scale. It'll kind of start with the fees and then kind of with a team, and we'll see if it moves along. But I'm going a lot more pessimistic this time around when it comes to my belief in decentralization and humanity as a whole. Because my last few cycles showed me that people act more irrationally than I can ever plan. And for that sake, I can't start with any absolutist ideals on what decentralization or immutability even should like. Like these primitives will be the first ones that I'll be deploying with proxy patterns, just because, I don't even trust immutability anymore when it comes to how users interact with these systems. Levex also builds off of a money market. I don't think it's something we've seen before. And again, use that money market model. So you can do this right now with something like Aave or Compound, actually, right? Let's say I want to go long BTC, right? So I'll get a bunch of Bitcoin. I'll deposit it as collateral. I want, let's say, 3x leverage, which means you need about 75-ish, 80% LTV. So I'll borrow a bunch of USDC against the BTC I just deposited. I'll go swap that USDC to BTC. I'll put the BTC in again as collateral. I'll do that another time. And now I have a 3x position that is a BTC long with a USDC short with BTC as collateral. This really just automates that whole process. And it means that, anything that's accepted as collateral, you can use as margin. Margin can be different from collateral. So in the above case, my margin could have been 1,000 USDC, but my collateral is the BTC. That's part of that wrapping process. And if you look at, perp interest rates, that's really the difference between my long and my short positions. And in this case, the amount of USDC borrowed, that's the premium people are paying for that short position. And the interest being paid on BTC, that's the interest for their long position. So money markets already do that. It's really just changing the UX and the flow and facilitating that swap to happen without slippage. That's a big one, because otherwise you need to go to an AMM and exchange the USDC for BTC. So in this case, that happens on the money market itself as an atomic level, where it's just exchanging it at the Oracle prices with a small fee, and then your perp interest that you pay or get paid, funding rate, as they call it in perp technology, that's just the difference in the interest rate you're paying for the borrowing asset versus the interest you're being paid for the providing asset. And then you have on-chain perps, with spot perps that are whatever leverage based on the LTV, and you can put whatever margin you want. That one.
And will you guys be able to do an order book there, Andre? Will I be able to do an order book because of Sonic?
You can. So one of the things we'll also be showing is order book based trading instead of standard AMM, so standard club. This is something we actually already had ready at Fantom, but we didn't want to deploy it there because if it gets a lot of activity, it can drive up the fees, but in Sonic, it doesn't. So it's pretty straightforward to do it there. It's not needed for the primitive to work, but I do think it's a nice little value add on top of it. WitnessNet, I don't know if I've mentioned that one. I'm trying to remember what I said in the tweets.
It was FX-swap and blockchain bureau as well.
FX swap one is actually easy. That's a new volatility based AMM curve I came up with. So stable swaps, you've got sort of at the X3Y plus Y3X, and then at the full extreme of 100% volatility, you get X times Y, which is the Uniswap one, X3Y being the solidly one, and this one adjusts between those two curves based on the on-chain volatility of the trades happening. So if it's stable swaps, it'll naturally gravitate very low volatility and end up at the X3Y. If it's super volatile, or even just during a period of time super volatile, it'll move towards the X3Y. But then for like closely correlated assets that trade somewhere at like 10 to 15% volatility, it'll trade closer to the X3Y than it does the XY, but still enough on that curve so that you still have the correct pricing. So again, pretty straightforward in my mind, but X3Y was also pretty straightforward in my mind, but people aren't building this stuff. A big reason, actually, even with Yearn, why I didn't build stuff is I used to think of something and then I'm like, no, that's too easy of an idea. Someone would have built it, but it doesn't exist. So obviously it wasn't successful. And then I just never build stuff. But I really think builders, when they get an idea, just build the bloody thing. Some will be successful, some will be failed, but you'll be amazed how many times I've shot down my own ideas because I'm like, no, that's too simple. Why has no one done that yet? Obviously, someone should have done that yet. This is another example of that. WitnessNet is a bigger one. That's a fully decentralized ZK oracle for arbitrator requests. So the little bit of code that's encapsulated with the circuit that anyone can run. You give it a HTTPS request. It unfortunately has to be HTTPS because I need those certs to be able to identify the keychain that occurred. It then calls that request and it does a handshake with that session so that it gets all of that session data. Then it returns whatever it was from the HTTP request, whether it's HTML or a JSON blob or whatever, it doesn't really matter. And then it uses the session keys along with the handshake, along with the encrypted transfer that happened that proves that this bunch of encrypted packets is this bit of data that you received. And then it runs all of that stuff through a circuit to prove that those session keys were in fact belonging to that session that did use that encryption to prove that it is this data. And then you have a URL, you have a data blob, and you have a ZK proof that you can submit on-chain to prove that this data did come from that URL.
This is to prevent like fraudulent user interfaces.
Well, this is for anything. So I believe that the current Oracle pattern is wrong. Right now, if I want to use, let's say, a weather data, right? I'm gonna go to Chainlink and I'm gonna be like, hey guys, I need this weather data. Can you please collate and collect this. A lot of new dApps might not have that kind of power, and they don't want to, need to be the centralized entity. So this thing they can run on their client-side code. You can chuck this in your little web app or however people are accessing your thing. So then the client, while they, and then the other thing is, I feel Oracle updates should happen during the transaction and not just continuously on chain. So if you're looking at pricing updates, that's just happening whenever. It's not being triggered by an event. Meanwhile, if the price changed, there will be someone who has an incentive to update it on chain. Whether it's a bot that wants to liquidate, or a trader, or someone at a money market that wants to do a deposit and a borrow, all of those events should trigger the Oracle update. So in this case, you need that person initiating the transfer to provide you the Oracle update, but you don't necessarily trust that person. So you need a way to be able to say, hey, the data they're giving me, I can trust it. And the way I trust it is because I know it's a URL I trust. It's data that's secure and encrypted, and they are providing it to me as part of their transaction. So now when they want to borrow money, I don't need to go look at whatever Oracle to update. The user submits that for me, and thanks to this proof that shows that handshake happened and everything happened and it's the correct cert that I'm expecting, I know the data is solid and I can accept it as part of that on-chain update. So that's how I think the Oracle paradigm should happen, because I think it removes a lot of on-chain bloat. Yeah, that one's probably the most technical of the projects, which definitely I quite enjoy.
And more like infra focus, whereas I think a lot of your focus is typically on like end users.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And so this last one, yeah.
No, I wanted to say it is and it isn't. I mean, Yearn I think is another good example, because Yearn was never meant for end users. Yearn started as me managing the bit of money that I was doing for some teams back then. And every morning I used to log in, I used to go look at Compound, I used to go look at DYDX, I used to go look at Ava, and I used to check their interest rates. And then I used to manually move the money from the one to the other one if the fees wouldn't cut out the amount I would make for the day. Back then fees were a few cents, so it was worth it moving it every day. And then eventually I was like, after doing that for a few weeks, I was like, Andre, you're a coder, there has to be a better solution. So I started doing a smart contract that then checks all of the rates for me in real time. So then all I need to do is click not click, but I had to send the rebalance transaction. And then the smart contract would look, okay, which one's best, and then move it there. And then I still once a day had to go and, send the rebalance transaction. And then I was like, hey, if I open this up to other people, every time they deposit or withdraw, it'll rebalance. And then I don't have to do the stupid transaction every day. And that's why I opened it up to users.
No way.
So that whenever they interact, that was it. And Solidly was originally built because of the stuff I wanted to build on top of it. Protection markets, LevX, all of the stuff I mentioned now needs an AMM that has a reserve-based Oracle. Because one thing, if you look at Uniswap TWAPs and stuff, which are awesome on-chain oracles, but they don't take on-chain liquidity into consideration. So if I want to do, let's say, a $500 million swap, they give me the price, but they give me the price irrespective of the available liquidity. One thing I needed on-chain was a TWAP that I could use, but it needed to take in consideration the liquidity. So if I want to liquidate, someone's position, it doesn't help I ask Uniswap for the TWAP because it gives me a fixed price based on the last trades. I needed to know this big block that I want to sell, how much are you going to give me for it? So it's almost like a quote-based system if you change it to reserve-based liquidity. So that's one of the biggest things in Solidly, actually. It's one thing that often pisses me off a little bit, because there's a lot of technology in Solidly that is not being used in any way. Everyone's like V33, woo, whatever. That was the jokey, memey fun part. That wasn't even meant to be core. The built-in volatility, because it has its own little volatility measure, so that, like I said, you need these volatility measurements to be able to do those AMM curves. It was designed for that. The RWAP, as I call it, which is reserve-based time-weighted. That is meant for being able to do on-chain quoting for liquidations, or again, LevX, being able to see what can you quote me for that trade without needing to actually execute the trade. Just a little disclaimer, the stuff I built aren't actually for end users. They're actually built because there's an on-chain technological requirement that I need to facilitate.
That's the Andre that we know right there, bro.
I'm glad.
Sorry, guys. Not for you, but they're just because that I am just too lazy to click a button every morning. Fuck it. Fuck you. Oh my goodness.
You pay the fees.
That's good stuff.
That's true. That's true.
Well, I think the last one, and then we can kind of close this out. Really appreciate you taking the time today. Is the under collateralized lending, this idea of on-chain credit.
I had a comment on that actually, and like this one is a much more traditional business. Like I said, it already has a big team. It's been in development for almost 4 years now. We have a ton of data. It's almost a petabyte of like data that has been ETL'd and it has been changed to facilitate a credit score. Now, the one part is the on-chain part, but when you say on-chain, I have to add asterisks because there's hey, I don't want a KYC and give you any of my personal details. And that guy has a credit score. Now that one, we can't give an under-collateralized loan because you can try and fake the system and cheat it around so that you get a nice score and then you try and get a massive payday. So for that guy who's not willing to provide any additional data, what we can offer is better LTV and better interest rates. But it's still going to be a collateralized loan. There's no way around it unless you're willing to give us something that we can use in the normal legal world. The guy that's willing to add the little bit of extra, so that one we can still do as a decentralized primitive. We can write that on chain, and that's actually where my witness net comes in again, because I don't want to be writing that stuff on chain the whole time. But when the guy applies, I want him to sign a message that proves that this is my private key. That private key then goes to our blockchain bureau servers that gives me the score, and then I know that score came from that URL, and then I publish it there. You know, I know it seems like I'm building all of these things in isolation, but they all actually come together. Every so often, I'm just chased out of the space for a few months, and then I have to kind of restart by my own choosing, I guess. But yeah, so that one, you know, you'll be able to get better rates likely than you'll get at an Aave or a Compound or whatever, but it's still going to be collateralized. Then, if you are willing to provide some real world information, then we start looking at the under collateralized lending, which you can still do on chain, and we can do most of that KYC stuff also, you know, via ZK implements, so that you don't actually have to disclose anything serious. You just need to do some proofs. Then there's sort of the traditional credit scoring side, which a lot of traditional institutions in the non-crypto world that might have a crypto touch point, you know, so they have they might have a deposit address for USDC. So they have that address and they now want a little bit of extra credit scoring data, you know, maybe you're a thin file or whatever. So they talk to us so that we tell them, hey, this is the activity, this address is likely linked to these. This is the OFAC and the compliance and blah, 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 blah. Because we've got sort of standard regulatory stuff in there as well. So that enriches their data set so that they can do that. And then the last one is the standard regulatory stuff. But, you know, that competes with the likes of TRM, Chainalysis, all of these guys that are already doing those reports. So that's not really the core business, but it is there because that was part of the score building process. So we do offer it. But those are traditional business stuff, you know, that's you sign up with an account and you grab a credit card. You never even touch the blockchain there. In terms of the data, because this was the fun part, you know, because every money market, every AMM is a little bit different. You know, some do events, some don't do events. Some have on-chain logs, some don't have. Some you actually have to look at the transaction. Some do it as internal transactions, some do it as core transactions. So that's been a process to sort of adapt each of these main money markets. And look, a lot more niche stuff we don't yet support, but you know, we've got all of the big guys across all of the big chains, the money markets, the AMMs. It's also at the point where we're looking at trader activity. You know, what kind of stuff do you buy? How long do you buy and hold? Because there is a direct correlation between, you know, how much you're trading versus your credit worthiness and the kind of assets you're buying and your credit worthiness. I mean, no surprise, the guy that just buys $1 million of Bitcoin and holds it for 5 years is better than the guy flipping $10 of shitcoin number 3 this week every 5 minutes. But still, it's nice to have been able to codify it and show, you know, the data proves my theory. So yeah, that's quite nice. But otherwise, you know, a lot of the stuff, when I kind of took my hiatus, I think towards the end of 2022, I've shifted my focus to a lot of things that are an intersection of traditional finance and decentralized finance. Credit scores was a big one we identified. At that time, I was also helping a few regulatory bodies and stuff in terms of ETFs, standard spot ETFs, nothing fancy. We were looking at facilitating funds that hold these spot assets. Custody was another one we helped with a little bit. So, all of these things where it isn't really on-chain, but it's interacting with on-chain assets in an off-chain way. But I definitely think the biggest one of those ended up being the Blockchain Bureau, which I think is a lot bigger than it's that combination of the technology and the social layer where you need credit score to facilitate a lot of stuff we take for granted nowadays. Even something as simple as having a post-paid cell phone plan, that's based off of credit scores. Like buying a vehicle with financing, credit scores, being able to rent an apartment, credit scores, So I think that's another one of those things that opens a bunch of new primitives that'll become available on chain within the near future, not the hypothetical, amazing roll-up abstraction 20 years away future.
Yeah. Oh, man.
Soon.
Andre's got to build something that allows us to spin up another debt cycle of DeFi, or else this thing's never going to get off the ground again. So let's just throw uncollateralized lending.
Got to keep that debt wheel going, my man. Like, we've got a whole new captive audience of suckers that haven't been burnt yet. Let's make sure they never want to come back.
Yeah, and Andre goes on his next hiatus. God damn it, Andre! Why do you have to say it like that, man? Well, hey, man, Robbie, Andre, it's been a bit of a journey here today. Andre, thank you for the time. Yeah, this has been great. Welcome back to the
public
community
side, I guess.
Yeah.
I never left. I was still trolling on Twitter, etc., but just haven't really done any public-facing stuff. But there was a lot of just building that needed to happen, versus most of the projects are now ready to, start having external people interact with it. Which is also probably a reason why I'm more willing to do interviews and stuff now again, because I'm a bit more bored, because it's all audits and reviews and waiting.
And so that means Sonic's gearing up for mainnet as soon as we get these audits back and whatnot.
Most of them already back. We're already checked off. I know the team has an internal launch pretty soon, and then when that goes well, external launch. But it's all earmarked for December, as far as I know. Last time I spoke to the team.
Sweet.
Which I act like was a long time ago, but it was like Monday. So
nice. Cool. Well, sweet, man. Looking forward to that, and looking forward to messing around and aping again. I think that
no tokens,
I will.
So no aping for you.
No, just gonna play some new primitives, man. It's been a while.
Yeah, look, I'm excited about that as well. I think, like I said, I think under collateralized, I think insurance, I think, is important for a lot of bigger players to care about the space. And I don't think we've nailed that on chain yet. Forex, is one of the biggest markets outside of crypto, but it's just not a crypto presence. So I think that's just a function of AMM curves aren't as competitive. The one that I think technologically is cool, but it's probably not that useful is the Levex. Because on-chain perps are pretty. What's out there is pretty good. I'll have to say. There's those teams know what they're doing.
Darius from Vertex told me I was going to get absolutely owned in the Appchain versus L1 conversation. So,
like I say, I think there is a room and a place for everything. I think that a lot of people that might be exploring Appchains are just doing it for the fee extraction, which I think is the wrong reason to launch an Appchain. And I think there are a lot more costs than they are aware of. And it's just about educating them on that. I think there is a place and a time. Right now, I just think it's the hardest times for builders to actually know where to go and what to launch.
Where to go.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully Sonic
that's really
becomes
the thing
a home.
I was trying to address. That's it.
Yep. Well, Andre, thank you so much, man. It's been a pleasure. Again, welcome back not in the back way, but kind of again, and
Appreciate it.
So, and yeah, man, we'll speak to you soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Andre.